Welcome back to another reading and correcting with me, Kindard, the Tiger Writes, and Ty, the Tiger Supervisor. These are where I read a chapter from one of my stories and correct it as I go. If you want to listen to these live, it's every Tuesday morning, 8 a.m. Eastern Time on Twitch. And if you're looking to support me, that is on my Patreon. Today we're doing chapter 16 of Breaking Step. I had wondered, the woman said, tone stern, if you would come. Tibs gasped, and his hand reached for his breast, then stopped so he wouldn't cut himself on the sword that was... He wasn't dead. How could he not be dead? The sword had skewered him, right through his heart. He looked down, and there wasn't even a rip in his shirt. It did not, she said in a definitive tone. You would not be here otherwise. He looked around, and the space registered clearer than the speaker, large and gray, the walls covered in sharp angles. He forced his gaze on her, and why it was difficult was due to her being the same gray as the walls. Her curves were much sharper than on the women he'd seen before, but there was something familiar about her. He glanced at the wall he rested against, and it too looked ready to cut him to ribbon. He'd move away if he could see one place on the floor that looked any safer. His gaze snapped to her. Metal! You're metal! He frowned. How am I here? How can I have an audience? It's supposed to happen somewhere close to the element, and I'm supposed to feel a lot. She tapped his chest, cutting the shirt and his flesh in the process. I cannot think of being closer to the living than against that which keeps them living. Any closer, and the living would have ended you far too early for you to be ready. It had been so quick he hadn't realized how he'd felt in the moment, but thinking back, the idea he'd died had shattered the ice, and he'd been enraged that he wouldn't be able to make the guilt pay, that Tarina would go unavenged. Tibs was on his knees, that pain barely noticeable compared to his emotions. When the scream ended, his throat was raw. He reached for water. He needed the ice to silence the anger, the recrimination, the guilt, the pain. He needed to be numb before the pain ripped him apart. Where was water? How could he have lost his element? This is me, she stated. My brethren hold no dominions here. So, no, stop whimpering. Think of now. Now, stop whimpering. Things of human. Just realize she calls him thing of humans. Everybody else, if they don't use it, well, only corruption uses Tibbs's name, calls him child of humans. Thing of humans. You are supposed to be special. Show me. He glared at her. Whimpering? His life had been ripped to shreds, and she accused him of whimpering? He was going to show her pain. He reached for fire and found nothing. It didn't matter. The inferno inside him didn't need fire to explode. He launched himself at her, ignoring the pain slicing at his feet. Stop! The order had no emotion behind it, but Tibbs found he'd stopped, held in place by points of metal pressing over him, piercing his clothing but not his flesh. Is this what you are? A thing driven by its feeling? A thing without control? Do you bend under the lightest weight put on you? Are you nothing without us? Tibbs tried to glare at her, but she walked out of his view, and if he turned his head to follow, points dug into him, a reminder of the damage they could do to him, that he could cause himself. She hadn't hurt him. She wasn't who had attacked him. She wasn't even the reason he was here, if Tibbs understood how audiences worked. The situation had caused it to happen. This pain the metal caused him was of his doing, not hers. He slowed his breathing, forced it to slow. He pushed his anger aside, the pain of Karina's death, the guilt at not saving her. The guilt at not saving her. His desire for revenge. He needed to be here. He needed to be now. Anger clawed at him without water to cool it, made thinking of then and later easier. Why did now matter, and all there was was in it was pain. The reasons came before and his actions later. All he could do was endure the now, and focusing on before and after made that easier. His anger wanted her to pay for forcing him to think about now, about the pain he was in. It wanted him to lash out against this element and to the abyss with the consequences. But, Tibbs reminded himself between breath, he wasn't his anger. All engulfing as it wasn't him. He wasn't the pain he felt, the vengeance he needed. He was simply himself. He let out another breath as she walked before him again, and he remembered what he had to do since he was here. He couldn't see the shadow among the angles and sharp edges of her body, so he looked around as much as the metal points holding him in place let him. Everything around him was metal, not only the person walking. Everything was metal, not only the person walking around him. That was so he had someone to interact with. He didn't see the shadow in the walls or the space between him and them. He studied her as she walked before him. The edges that made her body glinted as if lines shone on them, reminding him of Tyrannia's crystal eyes. And he knew who Metal reminded him of. Anger flared at the thought of the guild leader, but he forced it down. Her rules, her rules she bent to serve her. The rules she only bent to serve her didn't matter here. She didn't. This wasn't a time for what he'd do to her, how he'd use her to bring her leader to Craggle Rock. That was for later, for after, once he was back. Fear replaced anger as he remembered what awaited him outside, and he pushed that down too, something else for later. Why do you look like her? He asked when she was before him again, and she paused. She could be naked, he realized, or clothed. All the edges that made up her body made it impossible to tell. Like who? Tirania. With her being still, the glints settled, creating areas of shadows among the light that, who is she? She's a bitch, he replied before he could stop himself and had to fight the anger again. She's in charge of the guild. She's the reason Sebastian was able to destroy most of the town twice. She keeps lying about there being reasons for why she does what she does. But what is she? He frowned and points pierced him. The pain and annoyance and the question, did metal mean which element? She couldn't. The elements knew each other, but they didn't express interest in who wielded them. Who Tyrannia was as a person? How she acted? She's harsh, he tried. She doesn't compromise even when she acts like she will. All she cares about is what she wants. Metal nodded. That is why you see me as this. The pain in his temple stopped, the head shake. You made yourself look like her. You make me out of what is here. She motioned around them, and here. She tapped his forehead, and Tibs shoved that pain away with the rest. He snorted. If I made you, you'd be soft shapes. And what he needed would be easy to find, even with her distracting questions. I am not made for softness, and you cannot make us what we are not. The will, they, there will never be that. Will never be something you can do. He focused on the play of light and shadows. The shadow was what he needed, and they were only on her. Even still, the lights glinted, creating shadows. None of the glinting on the wall and floor and air caused them there. Was it hiding among them? Was it all of them? Did he have to grab the right one, or would any do? And how could he reach them when he was unable to move? No, that wasn't true. He could move if he was willing to endure the pain. What he saw, being able to only move his eyes, showed him enough to know that if he pushed against them, the points would cause more than pain. They would cut his body apart, just as when he tried to get the shadow out of purity. There would be nothing left of him, except that there had been. This wasn't outside the world of what was real to him. Here, his body didn't act the same as there. He reached for his essence and again found nothing. No, there was something there. His essence was there, and in it were mixed earth and fire, but little of them. How were they there if all there was her? If all there was here was her, metal? She said none of the others could be here. Was she allowing those three elements in? Was it happening without her knowing about it? If so, was this something he could use to his advantage? Maybe if he knew, maybe if he was more advanced in his studies of etching, he could think of a way. He couldn't suffuse himself. Earth made him more resistant to damage and the pain it caused, but could it keep him from being ripped apart? Even entirely stone, Jackal's body cracked when one of those creatures hit him hard enough. Fired then? He could. No, not fire. His emotions were already sufficiently out of control. His essence? Did it do anything? It was already coursing through his body. It was what changed when he was suffusing himself. He had no other way. A slight motion of his arm, and pain lands through as the points pressed in and others sliced. He forced himself not to think of what his sliced flesh would look like and pushed again, and stopped as the pain increased. As impossible as it should be, this was more painful than pushing through purity. He watched her watching him, no hints of emotion on the angle of her face. He searched the shadows while readying himself. How long could he take? Was he bleeding out there where time passed? Jekyll had been worried about how long his audience with Earth took. Time had passed when he was with fire, but had it been the same? Was time always the same when he was with an element? If Stowe didn't understand time, and he existed in the same place as Tibs, what was it to the elements, who existed outside of that place? But it meant something to Tibs, and he couldn't shake the feeling he was running low. With a scream, determination, and pain, he pushed through the points, reached for a shadow, then he was free and tumbling into her, through her, being cut apart until there the shadow melded into him. His reserve expanded, making space for metal among the others. Good, she said in that same neutral tone, and he turned as he fell. Through her he saw the remnant of a body held in place by thin spikes. He opened his mouth to ask. He screamed as he opened his eyes onto a man's terrified face. He felt the pressure against his neck, and Tibbs reacted, pulled essence to his hand, made a blade, and thrust it through the man's chest. He grabbed the collar and pulled, and saw the metal out of the man's back as he felt blood pour over him. He shoved him aside, glaring, not caring if it was his assassin or some passing townsfolk who thought he could rummage through his pocket or had been attempting to help. Someone had tried to kill him, and someone had to pay. Everyone had to pay until he had the culprit. If he had to burn the whole of the town to make that happen, so be it. He would show them what came of any who sought to hide his killer. Fire coated his hand, and pain bloomed. Then it was gone, and he was filling himself with water, forcing it into ice before his anger could find purchase. Then he was on a knee, his anger no longer masking his physical pain. Of course he was in pain. He'd ripped himself apart to reach her and the shadow. He frowned. This wasn't the pain of his entire body being pierced. The pain was only in one place. His hand came away bloody from his chest. The stabbing came to him, the sword appearing under the arm, pulling him. He dropped to his knees and finally noticed the essence pouring out of him through the wound. He suffused himself with purity, and it stopped. The pain went away. He could breathe without feeling his inside being torn. He stood again. Now he only had one job to do. Someone was going to pay. The body was that of a man dressed like any of the townsfolk. Maybe he had been trying to help. Something had pressed against Tib's neck, and next to where he'd lain was a sword covered in blood. His blood. He touched his neck. The pain was gone. Had his killer been about to cut his head off? Wasn't that how killers went about proving they had committed the act? So his killer was dead. The work was done. Only there were more out there here to kill him, to destroy him. They had to be dealt with too. It had to be final and decisive. This had to show any who came the folly of going up against him, against Tibs of Craggle Rock. He let go of purity and reached for. The pain started even before fire manifested, and Tibs shoved it away in favor of water. He filled himself with it, cooled it even as his anger tried to make it steam. Water could kill just as much as fire. It didn't even have to be hot. Cold, cold that killed Sebastian, taking pieces of him out slowly, letting the man scream in such a delightful way. Water wasn't only about soothing. It could fill a man's lung, take away the air. He could cover a town, even a city with it, and no one would ever dare threaten him in his again. He could easily, on his knees, panting. The ice finally crackled through and over him. Too hard. This had been too hard. Fire wanted too much, and part of Tibs was more than willing to feed it. It would be better without fire, without a threat to his control. If he could think of a way to reject it, he would. He stood. But things were as they were, and he wasted time wishing for them to be different. He had survived his assassination and gained an element in the process. That was what mattered. He turned to the body. There was nothing special about the man. He might not even be the one who had stabbed him. There was no way to know, other than the sword where his neck had been, to indicate that the man had been in the process of doing. To indicate what the man had been in the process of doing. This could be anyone, even someone living in Craggle Rock. And if they did kill one of the townsfolks, it was too late to do anything about it. He searched the body and came away with nothing, not even coppers, so probably not one of the townfolks. Sound from the end of the alley drew his attention. There had been a commotion. The crowd had reacted, and Tibs had been stabbed. Had the man arranged for it or simply taken advantage? It was still going on. He could go, stop it, get answers from those involved. He stepped in his blood and as he moved and stopped. He was covered in blood, and that didn't bother him, but it would draw attention, lead to questions that might clue the guild in on Tibbs's multiple element. He sensed the new reserve. He had to make time to practice suffusing himself with it to gain control, and that would mean letting go of water. He frowned. How much damage could metal do? He looked at the body as he touched his chest through the hole in his shirt. Too much. And that was without considering how quickly fire would take advantage and roar to the surface. He couldn't chance that. He headed deeper in the alley, looking for a way to the roofs. What Tibbs could do was ask someone how it was he had had an audience with metal. And that concludes chapter 16 of Breaking Step. If you are enjoying this, please leave a like. If you want to know when the next chapter is going to be up, subscribe and hit the bell. If you want to read the story, as well as the others, they are available on Royal Road for free. If you want to support me as well as read ahead of what's on Royal Road, it's about 20 chapters ahead right now, that is on my Patreon. And if you're looking to listen to these live, it's every Tuesday morning, 8 a.m. Eastern Time on Twitch. The links are in the notes, and with that, I shall wish you a good day.